Evening, everybody, and a huge welcome to everyone that is here. Welcome to the BSA. Welcome again to everyone who has been here during the day. And you can tell from everyone that's been buzzing around what a fantastically successful workshop it's been today. So congratulations to all involved. It's a real pleasure to host this event tonight, and we're celebrating the launch of Victorians in Modern Greece, Literary and Cultural Encounters, which I have a real hard copy here, which comes from my office. It's published, as you know, by Routledge in conjunction with the BSA. It's part of the BSA's series of Modern Greece and Byzantine Studies. And as director of the BSA, I am also part of the process that sees these amazing volumes through. And it is one of the great pleasures of being in this job. And it's really gratifying to see this book come to fruition and to welcome it into the BSA's publication program that really seeks to promote innovative, rigorous, and interdisciplinary scholarship on Greece right up to the modern period, with the focus, of course, on Byzantine and modern studies. And I think it's fair to say that this book exemplifies the aims of the series in particularly compelling ways by examining literary and cultural encounters between Victorian Britain and modern Greece. It brings together perspectives from literary studies, cultural history, and modern Greek studies, and highlights the importance of transnational exchange in shaping intellectual and cultural worlds. And I think it also reminds us of the long-standing and often complex connections between Britain and Greece, and connections, of course, that remain central to the mission of the BSA. So book launches mark not only the publication of new research, but also the culmination of sustained scholarly engagement. And this volume really reflects years of careful research, thoughtful collaboration, and highlighting contrasts. And this is one of the things that I particularly liked about this, was the kind of differences in the oriental and Western perspectives, the Philhellenism versus anti-Hellenism, I suppose, and the kind of all within the context of a bombastic British Empire and declining Ottoman Empire, and of course the emerging Greek state. It makes significant contributions to our understanding of how Greece was imagined, represented, and engaged with in the Victorian period. I'm very happy to congratulate the editors, Evie and Anna, on the publication of this important book and to thank them for their contribution to the series. We very much look forward to hearing more about the ideas behind the volume and to the discussion that I'm sure will follow. So to start with, we'd like to welcome Tatiana Kondu, a Victorianist at the Department of English Language and Literature at the National and Kapodistrian University of Athens, who will present the book. And then the editors, Evie and Anna, will add to the discussion at the front here about the concept and of the project. So thank you all for coming this evening, and we look forward to hearing more about the book. Thank you very much.
Hey, good evening, everybody. Well, thank you for having us at the British School at Athens. It's a wonderful room, and thank you to all of you online who are joining us for tonight's presentation. So I'm delighted to be providing a little introduction and overview of the volume edited by my colleagues, professors Evie Mitzi and Anna Despotopoulou, titled Victorians and Modern Greece, Literary and Cultural Encounters. And of course, there's been the relationship between the Victorians and ancient Greece, as we've pointed out, has been extensively studied. Ancient Greece permeated Victorian literature, culture, politics, and ideals, and scholars have long explored Romantic Philhellenism in figures such as Byron and Shelley and Felicia Hemans, but by contrast, encounters with modern Greece have received far less sustained attention. And this is precisely the terrain that Victorians and modern Greece sets out to explore. And it explores the literary, this is a quote from the introduction to the volume, it explores the literary and cultural encounters between Victorians and modern Greece, offering a distinct perspective on the meanings and popular uses of Greece from the 1830s to the turn of the 20th century. And the essays examine how Victorians, the essays in the volume examine how Victorians encountered Greece as travelers, as supporters of the new nation state, as artists, as writers, and as readers of folklore and of contemporary Greek life. So the book spans the period, or looks at the period between 1830 and the early 1900s. And it draws on travel writing, fiction, periodicals, illustrations, popular fiction about the revolution, and I quote from the introduction, short stories about brigands, essays about Greek folklore or fashion, topographical or satirical illustrations, poems and travel accounts. And these are just some of the genres which developed the Victorians' views of modern Greece while creating an active encounter between two countries rather than a passive reception. And these writings, these texts, are often marked by ambivalence and tension and contradiction. And it seems that this is something that the editors and the contributors kind of trace through these cultural artifacts. So the book is divided into four sections. The first section, Travels, examines Victorian journeys to Greece from the early 1830s to the 1870s. So we've got an essay included by Sebastian Marcel on Christopher Wordsworth's Greece, pictorial, descriptive, and historical gift book, in which Marcel analyzes how the lavish illustrations in the book construct a historical vision of Greece, in which contemporary Greece appear as contemporary Greeks appear as marginal figures or as secondary staffers within a classical landscape. In Chrysa Marinos' essay on William Thackeray's travelogue, it includes a section on Athens. His narrative character, Titmars, complains about the discomfort and expense of innkeepers' bills. And it kind of shows this kind of mismatch between the imagined classical Greece that Thackeray as Titmars had and the lived kind of modern reality. And he's also kind of wondering about whether there are descendants, these women are really descendants of Aspasia or Phi. In the last essay in the section by Roberta Micallef on Lady Annie Brassey's writings, Micallef reads Brassey's travel writing as a kind of a through a colonialist perspective, and she focuses on Brassey's take on Greece. She sees it as a hybrid culture, and yet she finds that the climate and the nature are really lovely, and there's a lot of descriptions of the ecosystem of Greece in that section. So in the periodicals part of the collection, we turn our gaze to the Victorian print culture and the political and cultural work periodicals performed in shaping views of modern Greece. Konstantina Georganda's essay analyzes Pantz's visual and textual treatment of the Cretan question in 1969 and then again in 1897 and 98. And it shows how satire mediated British responses to Greek political struggles. And Evie, your essay on the woman's world, a periodical edited by Oscar Wilde between 1887 and 1889, argues that the magazine's representations of Greece reflect its gendered and class-based ideology during debates over women's education and work. And you've also looked at how modern Greek folklore was kind of disseminated to the British reading public through contributors such as Lucy Garnett and Theodore Bent, an amateur anthropologist who is the focus of Mathilde Perlis' essay section, where Bent's anthropological writings are looked at in relation, or rather, Benz looks at the archipelago and sees that there is a kind of the insularity that was enabled by the landscape has managed to maintain a Greek or a Hellenic, an ancient Hellenic pure lineage. And that there is evidence of an unbroken Hellenic continuity. And this keeps coming up in the volume, how travelers visit Greece and they're trying to match the Greek of their readings and the gift book illustrations and the Greek, the classical Greek to the modern Greece of the 19th century that they're visiting, and how there is this kind of dissonance between the contemporary and their expectations. The third section, fictions, explores literary engagements with the Greek Revolution and its legacy. There is an essay included by Maria Schina, who I think presented a paper in today's symposium on Mary Shelley, and this essay looks at The Last Man, Lodore, and Faulkner, and argues that modern Greece becomes this very crucial site for women's intellectual development and education. And Anna has an essay included in this section on short stories published in periodicals such as Dublin's University Magazine and Bowbells from the 1840s to the turn of the century. This is the time period here chapter traverses, showing how these stories transform Greece in many ways into a textual commodity that's endlessly reshaped for consumption. And finally, in this section, Vasiliki Kolokotronis' essay on Isabella Phoebe-Meos, A Daughter of the Clefs, or A Girl of Modern Greece, reads this 1897 novel, as both a sensation text, but also as crucially participating in the building of a young independent nation. So it draws on kind of, Kolokotroni reads the romance plot and the ethical and the civic duty that the heroine shows as a kind of an example for how to create a political life, but also a kind of an individual life. And in the final section, Synchronies, it includes essays that examine the kind of the reception of ancient Greece in the Victorian period through the lens of contemporary debates, including those prompted by Black Lives Matter. Mann's essay on whiteness in ruins looks at kind of the invention of whiteness as a means of distinguishing and measuring civilization. And Mann revisits women's writings on Greece from the 19th century. Mendelssohn's essay on Oscar Wilde focuses on Wilde's visit to Greece in the Orthodox Easter of 1877 and examines how Wilde kind of is shown to toggle between temporal and geographical and sexual and religious registers. And he acts as a bridge between the ancient and the modern. And finally, in this section, Victoria Mills looks at Vernon Lee's Greek essays that Lee published in the Westminster Gazette. And she's reading kind of Lee's notion of temporality, of how Lee tried to balance the realities of classical and modern Greece, and how she attempted to locate kind of the Greek imaginary through her lived experience. She found Greece very dusty and dirty. She was echoing Woolf there, but also there was this great nostalgia for the past, and she wanted to kind of create this co-constitutive relationship between nature and ruin. In the afterword to the volume, David Rossell argues that the collection serves two important purposes, and I echo his words as a closing remark here, that at first, it extends scholarship on modern Greece in the Victorian period by attending to a wide range of media, travelogues, illustrations, popular journals, cartoons, and anthropological writings that move beyond the kind of the highbrow or the canonical authors. And second, that it points to what remains to be done in this field. So it's my turn to offer my heartfelt congratulations to you, Evie and Anna, for this wonderful volume. It's an exciting collection, is intellectually rigorous, and I'm giving the floor over to you to talk about your work. This. So. So this is a question for Evie and Anna, of course. It's extensive scholarship on ancient, the relationship between the Victorians and ancient Greek culture. And I was wondering if you can tell us a bit more about how this idea of the Victorians and modern Greece came about, and what were kind of your first findings that led you to looking at this in more detail.
Well, thank you very much for the presentation, and thank you for the question. I would say that the book was the most comprehensive outcome of this research project. REVICTO is the acronym. I mean, the title of our project was Representations of Modern Greece in Victorian Popular Culture. It was funded by the Hellenic Foundation for Research and Innovation. It ran from 2019 to 2023, and it investigated the ways in which Victorian popular literature, so the emphasis is on popular literature and culture, represented and interpreted 19th century Greece in magazines, journals, and all kinds of publications. Our aim was to contribute to the scholarship, to build on the existing scholarship and contribute to it on the cultural affiliations between Britain and Greece in the Victorian period, focusing on that period. And I was the principal investigator, and I was blessed with a great team. and Anna Despotopoulou, of course, my colleague at the Department of English Language and Literature at the University of Athens, you, Tatiana, as the external member, because at that time Tatiana was in the UK at Oxford Brookes University. And we had wonderful postgraduate researchers, Kostadina Georganda and Chrisa Marinou, and a PhD student, Mathilde Pirli. Some of them are here today. So the idea came when Anna and I decided to sort of join forces and write a proposal that would combine our research interests and our different expertise. Anna is a scholar of Victorian literature and culture, focusing on gender, mobility, and space. And my own on Greece in English literature, mostly classical reception, but also travel writing. So, you know, we thought of doing something together to write this proposal together. And in general, this project studied comparatively both theoretical and literary texts, and depended very much on the digitization of all kinds of sources, 19th century periodicals, newspapers, but also other archives of texts and images. So we examined all kinds of Victorian texts in the project in those years that engaged with modern Greece, a variety of sources, variety of genres. And we wanted to represent the debates, the controversies surrounding this representation, but also how this cultural relationship developed during those years, and especially through the presence of Greece in Victorian popular literature.
Okay, thank you. I'd also like to thank everybody for being here today. I would just like to add that the more we looked, the more we found. The resources, Victorian resources, are just inexhaustible. We read and read. We found a lot, especially in the digital archives. And we disseminated our findings in various ways. The website, you can see here a taste of the website. We created a digital index, and we also wrote many blog posts on short topics that short texts about interesting topics that related modern Greece to Victorians to modern Greece, the cultural encounters. We also held workshops. We hosted a conference, and that gave us, of course, the opportunity to reach out to other colleagues also working on modern Greece and in the Victorian period. And of course, the book, which went beyond the scope of the project, so it didn't deal only with popular culture, but it went beyond that. So the book, as well as the project, it developed many of the issues and questions that emerged during our research. And as I said, many of those topics can be found on the website. So I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank the BSA, to thank the directors, John Bennett and Rebecca Sweetman, for embracing this project from the start. The BSA, the whole process was very encouraging, very supporting. And of course, the BSA's committee for Society, Art and Letters, and of course, the reviewers of the project. And of course, to also thank the contributors of the volume for sharing their work, sharing their research, and their generosity. And some of them are here today, and maybe some are online as well, and I'd like to thank them. So
yes. Okay. My next question is about the kind of the This recurring theme in your essays and in the essays of your contributors on picking up this ambivalence the Victorians felt towards the Hellenic world and modern Greece. And you cite in your introduction, George Gissing's, you cite an excerpt from Gissing's Sleeping Fires, published in 1895, where the narrator describes the proximity of the Piraeus railway station to the temple of Theseus, and I quote Gissing, as a futility and an impertinence. And Chryssa Marinu also quotes Thackeray's Titmars, who wanders in Athens. What have these people in common with Pericles? What have these ladies in common with Aspasia? So could you share a few examples from your own research where this ambivalence is particularly evident, and how, if at all, it is negotiated?
Well, we were interested in 19th century Greece, not only as a site of conflict, ancient Greece versus modern Greece, past glory, degraded present, but also as you mentioned, a site of negotiation. And this is actually a theme that appears in most of the chapters of the book. For example, Sebastian Marshall in his chapter shows how modern Greece's natural landscape becomes a bridge between the past and the present. So there is connection there, not just conflict. By examining Christopher Wordsworth's Greece, pictorial, descriptive, and historical, very popular, published in 1839. And Wordsworth there guides his readers through tales from ancient history and mythology, and by identifying ancient sites. So those illustrations prove a kind of bridge. You could see that in this image where he compares the carts. Wordsworth compares the carts of contemporary peasants to those of antiquity. So there are all these, there's a continuity. Or in another image, you can recognize the structure, but he does not, Wordsworth does not isolate the ancient temple of Hephaestus, or Theseo, from contemporary Athens and its inhabitants. The illustrator here stages a kind of meeting between the Oriental and the classical world, and of course that was Athens in the 19th century. You can see different symbols and different images coinciding here: the minaret, the palm tree, men with fustaneles wearing the Greek national costume, and of course the ancient temple. Of course, this kind of bridge may become a gap, as we see. You mentioned Thackeray, and this is of course used for satirical reasons, and it can be very funny. So in Thackeray's notes from a journey from Cornhill to around Cairo by way of Lisbon, Athens, Constantinople, and Jerusalem, published in 1846, Chryssa Marinu emphasizes this satirical view of Athens. As he walks in Athens, of course, Titmarsh, Thackeray's persona, finds a mismatch between the imagined and the lived experience. All the expectations raised to British travelers, especially, they believe they're going to relive the myth of Greece, but of course they encounter this reality, quite disenchanting reality of dirt, bed bags, and overcharging hotels. So it's actually very funny to read. Now, if we move to Theodore Bent, in Mathilde Prilly's chapter. He was a fascinating figure that I discovered through Mathilde's research. Amateur explorer, ethnographer. He wrote many books, and he contributed to many periodicals, both scientific and popular periodicals. So for him, the islands of Cyclades were like an open window to for time travel, because it took him back to the age of Homer. It was an unmediated view to what was considered as the founding culture of the West in the 19th century. So he viewed these societies, and he lived there for months, as, this is a quote, deliciously primitive. And of course, he treated the Iliad and the Odyssey as sources of realistic and historically accurate information. He used them as textbooks against which he read modern life, the customs, the beliefs, the practices, and the overall structure of those island societies.
Thank you.
Well, this trope of time travel that Evie just mentioned can also be found in short stories published in various magazines and periodicals of the period. I found a very interesting one called A Day in Ancient Athens BC 470, which was published in The Leisure Hour in 1890, where 5 British characters are miraculously transported to ancient Athens of that period, and they're shown around by a man who calls himself a miracle worker, who has this gift of time travel, and he takes the 5 British characters with him. But not only about ancient Greece, so even in stories about modern Greece, and this is a story about the Greek Revolution, even in this story, we do see the same trope of time travel, where during the narration of current events of the Greek Revolution, we see the narrator suddenly remembering or inviting the reader to go back and think of ancient Greece. So in this particular story, you seem at length to dwell yourself in these old days. This is a trope, a narrative trope that returns again and again. We find it in many short stories of the period. And of course, it is always the narrator, who is certainly undeniably British, who compares his erudition, his knowledge of ancient Greece and ancient Greek to the ignorance of modern Greeks, because the modern Greeks cannot recognize the references to the classical, to the classics. So we do have this contrast very often in these short stories, which I found. And of course, the education of the narrator is emphasized, as I said, as opposed to the ignorance, the lack of classical knowledge of the Greeks themselves. So often the past is reconstructed, like in this case here, to compensate for the rather disappointing image of Greece in the present. So we do have this negotiation back and forth, modern and ancient. In another short story, which is about brigands, here Greece is described as being a great humbug from beginning to end. This is what one character says in this brigand story from 1872. And this story is supposed to expose Greek political and financial corruption of the time, and it was written immediately after the kidnapping of English and Italian travelers and the murder of these travelers by the Greek brigands. But in the end, the story ironically reveals that there is more corruption in Britain than in Greece. And I think you can see it also, the parallelism between in the two images. On the one on the right, we have violence by the brigands. The one on the left, we have violence by the British. It compares the British to the Greeks, but in the end, it seems that the corruption is more there. So sometimes we have these twists in the story. I think the most nuanced, perhaps, treatment of this negotiation of past and present can be found in Oscar Wilde, and this is in the chapter by Michelle Mendelssohn, who describes the way Oscar Wilde negotiates past and present, creating a kind of a transtemporal continuity in his work, in his poems, a sense of simultaneity between past and present. But also how Wilde manages to triangulate the past and present with an unimagined yet future, or rather an imagined but not yet arrived future, which he connects to the future of many countries that were in transition at that time, but also to Mendelssohn connects this to Greek love, that of course was connected to classical Greece, but also it carried a hope, a future for a promise rather for future acceptance of his homosexuality. So Mendelssohn argues that he manages to triangulate these 3 time zones in a very interesting way.
Thank you. Yes. Which leads me to my next question, which is about Greece as a commodity, and that's a question for both of you. And Evie, you argue that representations of Greece in the woman's world contribute to a vision of femininity that combines feminism with consumerism and high culture with commodities. Nana, you suggest that short stories in Dublin University Magazine and Bow Bells turn Greece into a textual product endlessly consumed by Victorian industrial culture. So could you expand on how Greece, or the idea of Greece, becomes commodified in this text?
Well, when I examined this particular journal, The Woman's World, I was fascinated by the combination of stories about ancient Greece. Some were very, Jane Ellen Harrison contributed to this journal, and they were about Sappho or about the Greek democracy, Athenian democracy. But there were also many references to ancient Greece through fashion. And I think you can see some examples here of that for Oscar Wilde, fashion and dress were very important concepts. They were not trivial. So the woman's world combined, you could say, the serious and the trivial, because the Greek dress, or that was connected to aesthetic dress, of course, was also part of a freedom for the female body. So that was very important. So on the one hand, we have this kind of consumerism. These are reports from Paris by Violette, or from London Fashions, about how Greek, the allusion to ancient Greeks through dress, through fashion, is very important, also hairstyles. But at the same time, we have other articles that acquaint this kind of middle class female readership with issues both about ancient and modern Greece. So, for example, we have the history of fashion. There are Sappho robes, there are Greek tunics. There's a popularization of Hellenism, making Hellenism, in a sense, a commodity, something that the female consumer can buy. But also, Wilde was very instrumental in promoting this Greek-style fashion, both as the editor of The Woman's World, but also as a proponent of dress reform, to change the way women dressed so that the body would be freed from these restrictions. Also, we see in the same magazine the employment of Greek dresses in performances of Greek tragedy, Electra, that was performed by women at the first women colleges in England. And all these, I think, connect, again, they're related to the theme of the ancient and the modern, connecting the ancient and the modern, but also they relate to gender because they empower women. These are the new women of this late Victorian period. So this is a reflection also of this journal and other journals' ideology in a period where, you know, these were hotly debated topics, the capacities, roles, occupations, franchisement of women.
Thank you. In terms of the commodification of Greece, this was one of the original ideas that we had when we were writing up the proposal for the project, because when I was reading these short stories, probably little read or not read by anyone before, they reminded me so much of these blockbuster movies that we have nowadays, where Greece becomes a commodity, especially ancient mythology becomes a commodity. So they very much reminded me of that, because they mythologize, they re-mythologize, created new myths about Greece, which I assume, you know, gradually started replacing, you know, so they became the norm in a way, and they became commodities. They sold well in the periodical market. So I assume that's why so many were published at the time. So we have many short stories about ancient Greece, which are set in ancient Greece, and others which rewrite myths, or the ones like the ones with the brigands, where they write new myths about Greece. But in terms of gender, just to complete Evie's thought here about the emancipation of women, many of the chapters in our book do broach the topic of gender, and especially in relation to the Greek Revolution. So both in my chapter, but also in Maria Schina's chapter, which is about Mary Shelley, and most of us were here this morning. Oh, sorry, I forgot to click on that. Yes, we could go. So in Mary Shelley's work, as Maria Schina argues, the struggle for the liberation of Greece gets tied with women's struggle for liberation, for emancipation, for self-determination. And here's a quote from Maria's chapter. Nature asserted itself, and it was the lovely land of Greece that met her eyes. You know, so Greece becomes a means for self-determination, but also it has a restorative effect, and it becomes a very formative experience for her. And the same in a chapter by Vasiliki Kolokotroni, which focuses on Isabella Favimeos, the daughter of the Clefts, where the heroine there is a young a foundling from England who transforms herself. Her name is Patience, but she becomes Stella, a Greek heroine of the revolution. She joins the revolution, and she shares in the building of the nation, but also as a means of, again, of self-determination, individual development, and as an ethical and a civic duty to herself also. So gender is an important angle that is touched upon from, you know, in many chapters of the book.
Sorry. You've kind of answered my next question, and it was about the affiliation of modern Greece and the construction of the modern Greek state and women. But we've got time for one final question, maybe. Okay. So the final question is about what the essay contributors and your project cuts a broad swathe across different media, and there's newspapers and periodicals and ephemera and travel narratives, like you've mentioned. And one essay examines pants and its reporting of the post-war negotiations and the Cretan question. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about how Punch's text and illustrations depict and comment on the political situation, because it seems like such a Victorian barometer of conservative sentiment. So,
Yes, sure. This is a chapter by Kostadina Yorgada, and she focuses on the Cretan question. She looks at punch images and cartoons and text from the 1860s and the 1890s. And I just showing you here one example of one such satirical approach to the Cretan question from the 1890s, 1898, a big cut called Saved. Which was published in the context of Crete's annexation to Greece in the 1890s. And again, here it revisits the very familiar trope of Greece as the maiden in distress. As you can see, she is held by the Ottoman, the Turkish man, weak, enslaved, a woman requiring protection, and the sailors who represent the European or the British here offering money to the Turk in order to save her. So it's this familiar trope which we find not only about Crete, but in general in many, many texts about Greece, where Greece is represented as this woman that needs saving, needs protection, needs saving. Either usually by the British in all of the illustrations in Punch, found in Punch. Do we have more to say? Would you like to add something?
I could sort of conclude maybe on the political aspect by just in Transit Mann's essay. I think what I found very interesting was how she connected and her own earlier work, because she has a book on Victorian women travelers to Greece, how she connects that to very important current questions. For example, she looks at those encounters between Victorians and Greece to ask questions about racism and oppressive structures of normativity. And she uses very much, this image of the Greek slave, Hiram Powers, probably the most popular sculpture of the 19th century. She has an interesting story about Frederick Douglass, who owned a small copy of this statue, and how when he was in Athens, he was not invited at the ambassador's dinner. So he was, encountered racism in Athens. And he was very hurt about that. But she asks those questions about how this representation of the enslaved white because of the marble, white because Greece had been saved from the Orient, and all these questions, how this Christian woman can speak to anxieties about abolition, labor, racial hierarchies, the justification of empire in the 19th century. And she argues that all these the depictions tell us a lot about the policing of whiteness, liberty, and equality, and the ways in which modern Greece was used in those important debates in the 19th century, which still concern us today. So she also discusses women travelers in that essay to show exactly those ambivalences about the symbolic value of Greek womanhood as enslaved, by whom, why, what. So I think these kind of dissonances, this kind of blind spots, if you like, open up possibilities for readings of modern Greece that are very different to the stereotypical or hackneyed representations of Greece that we see in the 19th century. So I think the connection between then and now through all these, I think we can see that in most of the chapters of the book. Why, it's still important for us to do this kind of research.
Thank you so much. Thank you for a wonderful book and for your wonderful answers to all of my kind of interrogatory questions. So, thank you.
The audience ask you some questions? Would that be all right? Sure.
Oh, do we have time?
Oh, yeah.
Really?
Would anyone in the audience like to ask any? Oh, look, I see. I knew Josh Barley had his hand up before I even finished my sentence. I'm going to have to run up and down with the mic.
No. Thank you so much. So interesting. So in terms of the, that's all right. In terms of the engagement with ancient Greece as opposed to modern Greece, is there or did you find a discernible progression in time about how that changes throughout the 19th century?
Hang on, hang on.
I would say it's a back and forth. Some of the concerns change. So we see, for example, we talked about gender before. So we see how in the earlier Victorian period, there are some intimation hints about the emancipation of women, and then it becomes very prominent later on, always in relation to women, to Greece, sorry, in relation to Greece, to modern Greece, how the modern Greek woman becomes this symbol for emancipation. So it's more pronounced towards the end. But as far as the ancient and the modern, we do find references, I think, throughout the century, sometimes more positive, sometimes more negative. I wouldn't say that there is a consistent progression towards the positive or towards the negative. I don't think so anyway.
Well, I think it's also formed by political events and particular moments, for example, the crisis in 1850. I mean, that clearly affects the writing about Greece in specific historical moments.
And then again, the war in time.
Yes.
I'm going to abuse my privilege and ask you, I mean, it follows on from Josh's question. So I was interested to see you in the book that there's presentations of admiration for the way some Greek women are dressed, but actually quite often Theodore Bent himself is very rude about the way Greek women are dressed. And I think his wife Mabel goes as far, oh no, it's not, it's somebody else, I can't remember who it is, goes as far as to say their Sunday best is so bad, it's completely unacceptable. But they seem to be, and lots of these early women writers seem to be mimicking what the men are saying. But by the end of the period, they're saying different things. So at what point do you see them breaking out of the mold of what's expected of writings, of that kind of, as you're saying, the trope of what's expected of the writings by the end of the period? So women's writings in relation to men. Oh, yeah.
I would say in the 90s, right? In the 90s with Edmonds and Mayo and... That's when...
Yes, yeah, probably. Also, I think late 1870s with Agnes Lewis, who presents a quite different perspective. Yes, and yeah, and women are traveling more. Greece is more accessible. And in some cases they're traveling alone or with female female friends, not with husbands. So I see, but even then we have travelers saying that they look like bundles of rags. Yes, we do get that even in the 90s, but in general, we have a different approach. I think there is a kind of communication, or they try to speak to Greek women and so on. Yeah.
Thank you. You've load the questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for a wonderful presentation. What a wonderful subject you had of popular culture. What a wonderful period. Must have been very lucky and very happy to look through all these magazines and short stories. I have so many questions, but I'll ask just one. In 1822 was the massacre of the island of Chios. which created a huge Phil-Hellenic movement throughout Europe, and of course changed the way that Greece and Ottoman Greeks were perceived. How was that seen in Victorian popular culture? It must have been a major event. It must have had a huge influence.
I remember finding many poems about it in that period. There were many poems. There was also one by Hemans, if I'm not mistaken. There's one by Hemans also, but many other poems in the periodical press by probably unknown poets, usually women. I think women, if I remember correctly. So no, I'm sure stories. No, I don't remember. I don't think I've found any. I don't know if Matilde here, who's the periodical expert, remembers any stories. No stories, but certainly poems. I remember seeing quite a few poems, and certainly a lot of newspaper coverage. A lot of coverage in prose, reports and newspaper coverage. But as far as stories, I don't recall any. We have done some. Yes, we have done. Yeah. Yes.
We have lots of questions online and lots of very positive and congratulatory remarks, but there's we can send you a copy of these so you can have them. But there's a question here. So there's some long questions which we will save, but as a question that asks, what deeper cultural tensions or clashes did you find in the writings besides uncomfortable weather or not finding classical links in the present population? Was the receding Ottoman Empire problematic, for example?
I think we found many different, not just these kind of funny complaints about dirt that, of course, are political all the time when, travelers or other authors complain about the dirt. So this is, well, factual, of course, but also has symbolic, I think, meanings. I think that there was, in this contrast between ancient and modern, one of the reasonings often was the so-called Ottoman legacy, that if things did not work as they were supposed to do, or corruption or indolence, that was blamed on all the years of the Ottoman occupation. So clearly many writers and travelers, or in fiction we see that, because there are many stories written in the Victorian era when Greece has been independent for many decades, where they take the readers back to the era of the revolution or just before the revolution, and we have images of kidnapped women taken to harems, or all kinds of horrible things happening. And I think this is a kind of criticism against, again, all kinds of oppressions, political oppressions, or things that people, writers feel still prevalent in Greece. And the hope that there will be reform. This is often expressed too.
Yeah, no, I don't think I have anything to add. It is these stereotypes that we do find throughout the 19th century, which relate to the Ottoman Empire, and Greeks seem to have been perpetuating some of these stereotypes. So yes, we do see these tensions. The brigands, of course, yes.
Mm-hmm. We'll take the last two, and then you've had your hand up for ages.
Thank you so much. I was really fascinated by the effects that you mentioned on the theatre and those sort of combining of causes, the women dressing in modern Greek women's clothes and ideas of liberation, both gendered and national, coming together there. Admittedly, I don't know a lot about popular culture in either country in this period, but having just seen the National Theatre's dramatic reading of a Greek play from the 1890s, Yannis Kabisis's I Kourdi, there you see this marrying of different questions of gender and migrant struggles, national struggles, etc. And something that came to my mind was that Kabesis, as his protagonist, sort of expressed frustration that he can't translate various Armenian and Russian pamphlets on the subject and popular literature on the subject rather than works of literature. And so that just made me wonder, again, seeing that from a Greek playwright, whether you came across any interesting examples of Greek popular culture or Greek literature responding to any of this English popular literature that's being written about Greece, whether there's any sort of response to the English sources that you're working with.
I think that's a very interesting question. Probably a next project that we may undertake. I don't know. Does anything come to mind?
Well, we see some kinds of exchanges like that in late 19th century articles. For example, Mayo could be, I mean, some of her stories published in women, not just women's magazines, but also some Christian magazines, suggests exchanges with Greek women who have their own periodical. So she refers to that. Or Edmonds also refers to women poets in Greece. But at the level of a popular culture, I mean, something equivalent at that time, of course, there is women's periodical in Greece, but I think and maybe I'm wrong here, I think that the goal was more political at that time. So clearly, this is the difficult question. I mean, for me, I studied travel writing. How do we have accounts of how, the travelee saw the traveler? It's difficult to find, and when we find it, especially concerning women, it is mediated. So, but yes, of course, it is a crucial question. Thank you.
Last question, quick one.
Thank you very much for the presentation of the book. I have the book and I would like to review it for a magazine. I would like to ask you about the issues that have to do with society and politics of the time. That I mean, do you have any ideas to cover them in another book? Because it is a historical period which is very, very vibrant in Greece. I mean, in these issues as well. And we have also the women of the Greek Revolution, and we have Professor Beaton here, who is expert in the subject, of the Greek War for Independence. We have also these women. I mean, do they get any mention in the magazines? Because Evanthia Kairi, Domna Visvisi, Laskarina Bouboulina, and others. Just some.
Okay. Yes, the women of the revolution are revisited in the 1880s and 90s by mostly by women authors, but not exclusively, in various magazines. Bouboulina, of course, there are stories about her. Edmonds is the author that actually she published also one sort of mini biography in Women's World of Laskarina Bouboulina, and it's very much connected again to the struggle British women's struggle for emancipation at that time. So the national struggle is connected to well, the fight for women's rights in Europe at that time. And, with Anna, we worked on that actually in various other publications, not so much in this book, but in articles that we published elsewhere. So there is clearly a fascination with the women of the Greek Revolution. And it is mentioned by many radical, also liberal authors like Mayo, Edmonds, and other authors. Well, Garnet, yes, but Garnet was very conservative. So different perspectives, but yes, they are very much mentioned. Yes.
And they also, these women also inspired many short stories. So if we go back, to the 40s and up to the 60s, we have many short stories inspired by women's heroism, bravery during the revolution. So yes, we do have these very strong women who participate in the fight, who wear men's clothes, and so yes, they inspired many such works.
I think the theme of inspiring and powerful women is a really good note to finish on. And let's thank our speakers for a wonderful event.